Yo. Wow.
At exactly 2:17 a.m., the silence over Tel Aviv shattered, not with a warning, not with a siren, but with the unmistakable roar of incoming missiles cutting through the Mediterranean night sky. Seconds later, the skyline lit up like a flash of lightning frozen in time. But this time, the target was not just military infrastructure. It wasn't an airbase, and it wasn't a government building. According to early reports and satellite imagery, the missiles struck something far more symbolic, far more sensitive: historic heritage sites, architectural treasures that had stood for nearly a century, places recognized by UNESCO as part of humanity's shared cultural legacy. And now, parts of them were reduced to rubble. Tonight, we investigate what happened over Tel Aviv, how these historic landmarks became targets, and why this strike could mark a dangerous new phase in the Middle East conflict. Because when heritage becomes a battlefield, the consequences go far beyond war. Set up decades, these buildings stood as a symbol of resilience. Until now. The night of the strike, shortly after 2 a.m., Israel's early warning radar systems detected a wave of ballistic launches originating far beyond its borders. Military analysts believe the missiles were part of a long-range strike package fired from Iranian territory. Within minutes, Israel's air defense network activated. Iron Dome batteries rotated toward the incoming trajectories. David's sling and arrow systems prepared to intercept higher altitude threats. For a moment, it looked like the system would hold. Several missiles were intercepted mid-air, but not all of them. A handful slipped through, and their impact points shocked even seasoned defense analysts. Instead of targeting military bases, the missiles fell into central Tel Aviv, near some of the city's most historic architectural districts. The first explosion ripped through a block adjacent to Rothschild Boulevard, an area famous for its preserved Bauhaus buildings. The blast wave shattered windows across multiple streets. Fragments of concrete and steel rained down like a storm. Then came the second impact, closer to Dizengoff Square, a district known for its restored modernist structures and cultural institutions. Within seconds, centuries of architectural history were caught in the crossfire of modern warfare. The damaged heritage in the crosshairs, drone footage taken hours after the strike shows a haunting scene. Several historic facades partially collapsed, balconies twisted and torn away, staircases exposed to the open air. One of the damaged buildings, constructed in 1936, had been recently restored as part of a UNESCO preservation initiative. Now its central structure appears heavily compromised. Local preservation experts say the building's signature curved balconies, one of the defining features of Bauhaus design, have been completely destroyed. Across the district, emergency teams rushed to stabilize other historic structures, because even buildings that were not directly hit suffered severe structural stress from the shockwaves. Glass walls shattered, foundations cracked, and fragile historic plaster crumbled under the pressure. For cultural historians, the damage isn't just architectural, it's symbolic, because these buildings were not simply homes. They were living artifacts of 20th century history. Why would heritage sites be hit? One question now dominates military and diplomatic circles. Were these heritage sites intentionally targeted, or were they collateral damage? Iran has not officially confirmed the specific targeting coordinates of the missiles, but analysts studying the strike patterns suggest something important. The missiles were not precision-guided weapons designed for pinpoint accuracy. Instead, they appear to have been high-payload ballistic missiles designed to strike broad urban areas. In other words, the targets may have been symbolic rather than specific. Tel Aviv itself, Israel's economic and cultural center. By striking near historic landmarks, the psychological effect becomes far greater. Because when people see heritage destroyed, it sends a powerful message. War has reached the identity of the city itself. And that's a strategic narrative no missile defense system can intercept. The global reaction. Within hours of the strike, UNESCO issued a statement expressing deep concern over the damage to Tel Aviv's architectural heritage. Cultural preservation organizations around the world echoed the warning. Because once historic sites are destroyed, they cannot truly be replaced. You can rebuild walls, you can reconstruct facades, but authenticity is lost forever. Historians often point to cities like Aleppo and Mosul as examples, where centuries-old cultural sites vanished during modern conflicts. Now, many fear Tel Aviv's White City could face similar risks if the conflict escalates further. The strategic message, but beyond the cultural tragedy lies a deeper geopolitical signal. This strike demonstrates something significant: range, capability, and willingness. The missiles that reached Tel Aviv traveled nearly 2,000 kilometers. They crossed multiple defense layers, and they struck one of the most heavily protected urban areas in the Middle East. For military planners on both sides, that reality changes the strategic equation, because it proves that even symbolic targets, historic districts, cultural centers, iconic landmarks are no longer outside the battlefield. And when cities themselves become targets, war stops being distant. It becomes personal. What happens next? Israeli authorities have already begun assessing the structural integrity of dozens of nearby buildings. Some may require full evacuation. Others may face demolition if the damage proves irreversible. At the same time, engineers and preservation experts are racing to digitally document the affected sites. High-resolution 3D scans, architectural mapping, historical reconstruction models, all part of a growing effort to preserve what remains, at least in digital form. But the larger question remains unanswered. Will this strike remain an isolated incident, or is it the beginning of a new phase where cultural heritage becomes a strategic pressure point in modern warfare? Because if that line has been crossed, the consequences could reshape how wars are fought in cities around the world. Closing dramatic ending. For nearly a century, the buildings of Tel Aviv's White City stood as quiet witnesses to history. They survived world wars, political upheavals, and decades of regional conflict. But in just a few seconds of modern missile warfare, some of that history vanished, not because of time, but because of war. And tonight, as emergency crews work under floodlights among shattered balconies and cracked facades, one truth becomes painfully clear. When missiles fall on heritage, they don't just destroy buildings, they erase pieces of humanity's shared story. And the world may only now be realizing how fragile that story really is.